Tantor Audio presents A Friend Like Henry, the remarkable true story of an autistic boy and the dog that unlocked his world. By Nuala Gardner. Narrated by Susan Duerden. Prologue. My husband Jamie and I didn't want a dog. That's not to say we didn't like them. I had one myself as a child, and although Jamie wasn't used to dogs, he had nothing against them. No, we just didn't want one at the time, because we had enough responsibilities. Our young son Dale was locked deep inside his autistic world, terrified by every little thing, yet totally unable to communicate his fears or understand our reassurances. Every waking minute with him was a maelstrom of conflict as we plunged from one violent tantrum to the next. He didn't even know who we were, and our efforts to interact with him were deeply frustrating, completely draining, and ultimately, it seemed, quite futile. Then a chance encounter with Jamie's cousin's dogs gave us a glimmer of hope, and so began the road to finding our puppy. Even at 6 weeks old, Henry stood out from the rest of the litter. But we didn't choose him. He chose Dale. Whether or not he was at that tender age able to sense our little boy's troubles and feel he could be of assistance, I don't know. All I can say is that his beautiful, stoical, saintly nature was the key to unlocking a personality we never knew our son had. What happened was beyond our wildest imaginings. Nothing could have prepared us for the impact on all our lives of finding a friend like Henry. 1. The Arrival. My husband Jamie never forgets a date. He has a head for figures, which explains why he's involved in microchip design for a living. Anything involving numbers just seems to stick. So when he reminded me that Henry came into our lives on February 18th, 1994, a Friday, I knew it must be so. Our son Dale, then 5 years and 8 months old, was to have a puppy. Typically, this is an exciting day for a child, but our son was anything but typical and completely different from any of his peers. This day was for us all the highest risk and biggest gamble we were ever to take with Dale in his short but challenging life to date. We desperately hoped this innocent little puppy would at the very least be some sort of living companion for Dale, and maybe give him some insight into successfully having a first friend. One could perhaps be forgiven for wondering why he had no friends, but the answer is simply that Dale didn't have the faintest inkling of what friendship was, or a desire for it, let alone the ability to grasp the concept of how to maintain such a complex relationship. In his world, he had formed a bond with a pull-string 2-foot stuffed Mickey Mouse doll, which went everywhere Dale did. I used Mickey as a role model in any way I could to teach Dale. We also lived 24/7 with Dale's ultimate obsession, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, which was Dale's compromise with the real world. We learned to use this obsession to teach Dale the most basic social rules and how to try to make friends. Jamie and I employed Thomas as a teaching aid, using the train's personality and facial expressions to help Dale understand feelings and emotions. We also used some poetic license from the stories, such as Trust Thomas, who was the perfect friend and role model, Jealous James, Boring Bertie, and especially Helpful Henry, who was his favourite train. He also loved the whirring sound of Harold the helicopter, who was always happy. We didn't know it then, but some of these characters would open doors of opportunity for Dale in later life. To us, as the Fat Controller stated, Thomas was indeed a very useful engine. For 18 months, we were all involved with using this technique to help Dale, until we reached the saturation point using Thomas, and eventually ran out of steam. Unbeknownst to us, this little pup, because of Thomas, was to transform all our lives and future as a family, forever. For over 2 years, Our days consisted of surviving tantrums of epic proportions. They were epic in terms of both duration and the ferocity of the frustration and anger that was being unleashed by Dale due to his inability to communicate with us on any level. Dale had no idea who we were, and we feared we would never be able to reach him. Only by chance, at a children's Christmas party where Dale reacted as though Santa himself was a monster, could I put a name to the reasons for Dale's behaviour. The party itself was an alien and petrifying environment, and Dale clung to me as though his very life depended on it. On witnessing my son's reaction, a nursing colleague, Jean, gave me a word that made sense of Dale to her. But it left me feeling as though she had just told me my son had cancer. She said Dale reminded her of a group of children she had worked with in the past, and they were autistic. When I researched the subject, I knew Dale was a severe case. Despite all my efforts to get him help and appropriate education, no one would listen to me for another 2 years, when finally, aged almost 4, Dale was diagnosed with classical autism. Autism is diagnosed when there are deficits in 3 main areas that are known as the triad of impairments. The first part of the triad is an inability to communicate both verbally and non-verbally. Some autistic people may not have any language whatsoever, or little language, but all find non-verbal communication such as facial expressions, gestures, emotions, and tone of voice the most difficult. The second area is lack of imagination and flexibility of thought. This is often evident through lack of development in play. The third is an inability to socialize, make friends, and make sense of the world we live in. Autistic people compensate by developing strict routines and rituals, and they have problems coping with change. The stress of fighting authorities, living day to day with Dale's condition, and intensively trying to educate him by breaking through the autism, took its toll on my health. I was admitted to the hospital for tests due to unexplained secondary infertility, where it was discovered I was suffering from symptoms that indicated a possible pituitary adenoma, a form of brain tumour. I was due to have a brain scan in a couple of weeks. Thankfully, it later transpired that the symptoms were entirely the result of stress and exhaustion, which had caused my pituitary gland hormones to malfunction. During the period of uncertainty and anxiety, the best advice to alleviate this condition was to try and reduce stress as much as possible, and to this end, Jamie suggested it would be good to get me away. He called his cousin David, who lived with his wife Isabel, in the large Scottish village of Auchterarder, a journey of about 1 hour from our home in Greenock. There were stunning views from their house across to the rolling Perthshire hills. This was a good idea, but as with most trips with Dale, it wouldn't be straightforward. Much planning would be needed to avoid Dale's unpredictable responses. We had to prepare ourselves for most eventualities. I got around this by Mickey being there, but I'd also devised what I came to call my survival bag. This was a large shoulder bag that would contain all we would need to survive any outing with Dale. All of my own personal items, such as my purse, would be in it, along with diapers, a change of clothes, a Thomas cup, his current favourite 5 metal trains, and a couple of Thomas videos. Last but not least would be some food and some candy, if there was a rare opportunity to reward him. This bag would allow me to go anywhere, but more importantly, it was practical when I had to deal with Dale's challenges that any situation could throw at me. As soon as we arrived, Dale ran straight out to the back garden, and as usual began what we came to call his chariots of fire, relentless running routine. Locked into this ritual, he would give a droning noise as he ran, and would do this for ages if you let him. We got this name from the 80s film of the same name about Olympic runners. Isabel attempted to divert Dale's attention to a small soccer ball, but he resented the intrusion and continued with his run. Undeterred, she told him, "This is one of the balls the dogs play with. Shall we go and get them?" Dale ignored her completely. David nonetheless went into the house and liberated their 2 Scotty dogs, Barney, totally black, and Dougal, completely white, who came scampering out in full play mode, anxious for someone to throw their balls for them. To Jamie's and my surprise, Dale's face instantly lit up, and David and Isabel proceeded to show him the dog's favourite game. Dale seemed enchanted as he threw the ball, which Dougal promptly returned to him, dropping it at his feet, and so it went on with both dogs, until Barney retreated to the house for a nap. Dougal, however, was still up for fun, and Dale kept going, continually repeating the command Isabel had taught him. "Fetch!" Jamie and I stood by in amazement, as for the very first time our son interacted and played happily and naturally with another living being, something we'd never witnessed before. I think the fact that one dog was black and the other white helped Dale recognise which dog was which and reduce his confusion. It enabled him to play appropriately, and the dogs put no social demands on him. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," Jamie told David. "If we were visiting anyone else, he'd be tuned into a video by now." "Ever thought of getting a dog yourselves?" David asked innocently. "We need a dog like we need a hole in our heads," was Jamie's subtle rejoinder. On the journey home, I was happy and bubbling with excitement over what I had witnessed, so much so that Jamie eventually conceded that perhaps a dog was something we should think about for the future, once my health had improved. I think he just said this to shut me up, but as he should have known, once I decide to do something, the future is not an option. Jamie then pointed out that for the very first time visiting anyone, the survival pack had remained unopened, to the extent that Dale had been so happy he ate the same meal as the rest of us. Little did Jamie realise it then, but I was on a mission. The only question for me now was what type of dog. A couple of days later, I had finished my shift at the hospital where I worked part-time as a nurse among the elderly. I worked predominantly with stroke patients with communication problems. I was then able to apply a lot of these skills to try to help Dale. I hurried to the library and took a pile of dog books home with me, desperately anxious to find exactly the right breed. I needed to be sure the dog would be able to cope with the extreme environment he would be exposed to in our home. I turned to a book that had a table scoring various breeds out of 10 for temperament, intelligence, potential health problems, and most importantly, suitability for young children. As I studied each category, one breed shone through, scoring full marks and ticking all of the boxes. The more I read about the Golden Retriever, the more obvious it became that this was the dog for us. I also concluded that it would have to be a puppy that would grow and adapt to our household, because an older dog may not have coped with the ferocity of Dale's tantrums and screaming and the extreme environment living with his autism caused. The local vet gave me some numbers of breeders to call, but I became increasingly despondent as I worked my way down the list, only to be told by each breeder that they had no pups at this time, or if they did, the pups were all spoken for. Then the last person I called, a local woman named Val, announced she did indeed have pups available. I could barely contain my excitement as I read up some more on Golden Retrievers, becoming so absorbed that I didn't hear Jamie come home. As he walked into the room, I quickly tried to hide the book under a cushion. "What are you up to?" he inquired suspiciously. "Nothing," I replied nervously, as you do when you have something to hide. Then, trying to sound legit, I added, "I've been to the library. Just enjoying a quiet read while Dale's at Mum's." "There can't be any more books on autism, surely," said Jamie. "And even if there are, why are you hiding them?" Conceding I'd been keeping a secret, I showed Jamie the book cover with a Golden Retriever on it. Then, as his jaw dropped, I tried to plead my case. After seeing Dale come alive with Dougal and Barney, I didn't want to wait. I wanted him to have a dog right away. Jamie's response was tactful, sensitive, and to the point. "Are you nuts?" A sceptical husband, however, cannot stand in the way of a wife on a mission, and the day inevitably came when we went to see the pups in the nearby town of Guruk. We tried to explain the outing to Dale, but he clearly didn't understand. As Val showed us into her living room, Dale was quiet and withdrawn, and he remained this way despite the deafening noise of dogs barking in the back room. Val left us for a moment, and we took in our surroundings. The living room was like Retriever World, with every available space covered with photos and ornaments of golden retrievers, young and old alike. Jamie panicked, saying, "Is this what happens to you when you get a dog?" At that moment, Val reappeared with her mum, Sheena, both holding two of the cutest bundles of fur under each arm. When they set the pups down to run around, I was enchanted, but Dale ignored them completely. Worse, he started to rock and moan, as if it were all too much for him. Picking up on this, Jamie told me quietly, "This isn't going to work, Nuala." Disappointed, but not about to lose hope, I replied, "Let him at least see the pups for a while." "He is seconds away from a tantrum," hissed Jamie. Then, to our dismay, Dale suddenly pointed to the bookshelf beside the television, exclaimed with great excitement, "Thomas!" and proceeded to help himself to the solitary Thomas the Tank Engine video he'd spotted, nestling among a host of other videos and books. He gave the video to Sheena to put on, promptly kicked off his shoes, and settled down to watch from the big armchair in front of the TV, now totally content. I apologised to Val, and then melted as a couple of the pups came over to me. "They're absolutely adorable," I told her. "But can they play soccer?" piped up Jamie. "You'd be surprised what a Goldie can do," said Val. Even though Dale only had eyes for Thomas, I wasn't yet ready to give up. I knelt down and began to play with one of the pups to try to catch Dale's attention, but to no avail. I waved the pup's paw at Dale. He still ignored me. Jamie gestured to me that this was pointless, and I started to think he was right. Nothing was going to distract Dale now that he had Thomas. I asked Val if it was all right to stay until the end of the tape, to avoid a tantrum, but in a way, also playing for time. I desperately didn't want to give up. "Maybe when the video's finished," I added hopefully. But Jamie was emphatic. "He doesn't want to know, Nuala." Heavily disappointed, I had to concede. Then one of the pups wandered over to Dale's chair and tried valiantly to clamber up onto it. Sheena rewarded the little chap's efforts with a helpful push, whereupon the pup turned around and snuggled in beside Dale. "Look at that," I told Jamie and Val, heartened. Dale was still engrossed in the video, but he was now also gently stroking the pup's back, though he hadn't so much as glanced at it. Jamie replied, "He may be all right with him here, but lots of kids with autism are terrified of dogs." "Does he look terrified to you?" I countered. "He needs company, Jamie. I know he does." Sheena unwittingly broke into Dale's world by standing in front of the TV to speak to our son. "Have you got a new friend there, Dale? This little fellow needs a name. Can you think of a name for him, Dale?" Dale simply leaned around her to see the TV, and at that very moment his favourite engine appeared on the screen. "Henry! Henry!" Dale cried, and excitedly pointed with delight to the screen. "Henry?" said Sheena, surprised, mistakenly thinking he'd understood the question. "He doesn't understand," explained Jamie. "But why not?" I inquired. "It's a subject he knows, and a name he loves." Sheena observed, "Well, if he loves Henry the dog as much as Henry the train, we'll have no problems there." "Henry," repeated Jamie, before muttering, "The poor thing's doomed from the start." So it was that this little pup was named after a cartoon engine, and with Jamie conceding defeat, at long last we had a new addition to our family. Although, not the one we'd planned or hoped for. After the video had ended, in order to confirm that the pup was indeed to be Dale's dog, Val lifted up a floppy ear and wrote a big H in black felt-tip pen, much to the delight of Dale, who found this hilarious. While Jamie wrote out the cheque, I asked Val if she'd be prepared to take Henry back if his welfare started to suffer at Dale's hands, and she confirmed she would. Much as I would have loved to, we couldn't take the pup right away. We needed time to prepare Dale for this big change in his life. Val was happy to look after Henry for another 2 weeks, while we set about trying to help Dale understand what was about to happen. I involved Dale throughout this whole process, taking him on a few shopping trips to buy all we would need for our dog, and then I put our purchases in a large black trash bag. Jamie made a very professional countdown calendar, showing a picture of a specific dog item for each day, and Dale would tick off the appropriate item on a daily basis to give him a concept of time going by. I would then put that item in the dog bed that now occupied a corner of our lounge. I involved Dale as much as possible during the shopping process, so he chose, for example, the colour of Henry's bed, a special quacking duck chew toy, and a small blue collar. We were really happy during this process, and I remember it felt as though we were preparing for the arrival of a new baby. Jamie also spent time with Dale, using facial expressions to show how the dog would be feeling: happy, angry, sad, and so forth. He drew simple line drawings of a dog's face to illustrate each expression, though Dale seemed to prefer his dad's own physical attempts to replicate these. He found Jamie's impression of a happy dog, involving bright eyes, panting, and a waggy tail, particularly entertaining. We used a toy cuddly puppy on whose ear I had written a similar H to the puppy's to reinforce our efforts, and I also drew basic pictures of the house, showing Mummy, Daddy, and Dale, and then adding in the dog to illustrate that he would be joining the family. Dale was used to this type of visual explanation, and although he never responded, I could tell by the interest in his face that he seemed to be taking some of it in. How much or little, I couldn't know, but it was always worth a try. The night before we were due to collect Henry, a puppy photo that had been on Dale's bedside cabinet was put on top of all the other paraphernalia in the dog bed, to reiterate to Dale that his dog would be coming home the next day. We arrived at Val's, and as before, Dale went through the door without saying a word, but he was at least in a calm, good mood. He stayed close by my side as Val left us in the lounge to go and get young Henry. When she came back with our pup, Jamie sat reading a newspaper, oblivious. Val told me, "You'd better take him, Nuala. He's a big lump now," and passed Henry over to me. He had indeed grown in the 2 weeks since we had seen him. As his 2 big front paws rested on my shoulder, with Dale contentedly stroking his back, I hugged him to me, nestling into his soft, downy coat, and then placing a kiss on the top of his head. He snuggled in, and as I felt the love coming from this little pup, I realized that here was someone who would let me love him back. Silent tears were now running down my face. I hadn't been prepared for this, but I just couldn't help it. It felt as though I had at last been handed my yearned-for second baby. Jamie gave me a small nod to show that he understood. What neither of us knew then was that this beautiful little pup was to change all of our lives forever. 2. A different child. Jamie and I should perhaps have suspected from the dramatic fashion in which Dale entered this world that life with him was never destined to be straightforward. At 11:04 a.m. on June 13th, 1988, because he was stuck in a breech position, Dale arrived, 5 weeks premature, screaming enthusiastically. Every mother knows that surge of relief and elation when their newborn is placed in their arms. But my stomach heaved with fear when I saw the state of his head. I couldn't help it, as my knowledge as a midwife haunted me. The problem was excessive moulding. I had seen it before in other babies, but the shape of my baby's head was terrifyingly worse. It was quite flat at the back, it was severely elongated, and it virtually touched the tops of his shoulders, covered in bruises, even on his face. Thankfully, all medical tests revealed there was no obvious damage. However, I couldn't get rid of the deep feeling of unease within me that it would be a miracle if my baby got away from this trauma unscathed. Nevertheless, I concluded when we got home that I was just going to love and nurture him for the wonderful little baby he was. Only time would tell. At home, it seemed we had the perfect baby. In many ways, he was unique and so easy to care for. He was passive, placid, and would go to anyone, not missing me in the slightest. Many people would comment on how good he was, and I started to wonder whether Dale was unnaturally so. He rarely cried, and would sleep through the entire night without a sound. I remember having to lift him for breastfeeding. The only indication that he was awake would be the sound of his tiny fingernails scratching the sides of the vinyl of his crib. Nothing seemed to faze him. I will never forget the day when I left Jamie in charge so I could go shopping. I came back to the sound of rock music blaring from our apartment and found Jamie in the kitchen casually making coffee. "Where's Dale?" I shouted, horrified by the deafening volume. "In the lounge. He's really into Whitesnake." I hurried in to rescue my son and found him calmly bouncing in his little baby chair, quite oblivious to the racket. Only when I turned down the music and lifted him up did he cry, distressed at being disturbed. Jamie thought it was good that Dale didn't mind the music, but the experience left me chilled. On the second routine visit from the nurse, I expressed my feelings of doubt about Dale's welfare. She thought it unusual to hear a mother complaining that a baby was too good, and was reassuring with the words, "Just enjoy that you have such a happy and contented baby." In a way, I felt she was right. Although, on some deeper level, my lingering sense of unease about how different a baby Dale was than any other I had ever known continued to trouble me. Dale remained undemanding and at one with everyone and everything around him. I thought it strange he would only smile at random. To get him to smile, we would have to go over the top, bouncing him or making loud, silly noises. Even then, he seemed to be smiling only to himself. Dale's eye contact also seemed a little out of sync. Many a time it heartened me when he burbled or laughed joyfully at something, even though we couldn't figure out what amused him so. Like any new mum, and with my added knowledge of child development, Dale received all the usual stimulation that a new baby needed to help him thrive. In his crib there were some toys to pull, and his blanket had a sheep and train theme, with a matching mobile that played Baba Black Sheep, which I would frequently sing to him. Unknown to me then, this simple blanket was to hold a very special place in our lives in the years to follow. During the day, I would take Dale in his bouncy chair from room to room as I did the housework, talking to him all the while to try and gain his attention. His chair had giant, colourful beads that he would sometimes casually play with, but mostly he was content to gaze into space. Even when I attached dangling Disney characters to his chair, his play remained the same. He would only have a fleeting interest in them, generally hitting the toys by accident rather than playing with them as other babies would do. I found that Dale was addicted to motion, as he would only fall asleep in his cradle as long as it was moving. My mum could also get him to sleep, even after he had been screaming at full fury, by swaying him to and fro as she sang the same lines of a song over and over. Dale being an only child, I seized an opportunity to try and help his development even more. I joined a local breastfeeding support group, as it was good for me to see other mothers. It also gave Dale some experience mixing with other babies. It was reassuring for me to observe that by sitting up at 6 months, Dale was holding his own with them. Although this was good to see, This development lost its significance as I observed how different he remained from other children his own age. The gap between...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?